But I have found, and it's particularly true here in this clinic, but I've also found it outside in AA and also sometimes at the NA meetings that I go to, Dick may be asking himself, should I return to the practice of my religion? Should I go back as part of my recovery? And what I usually suggest is that it depends on how acute it is. If it's something that's bothering Dick, if he says a Catholic and he feels he ought to go to confession even though he hasn't been for a long time or something like that, if it's something that's bothering him and it's troubling him, I say deal with it. Sort it out. Come back to your church. And if he's a Catholic, for example, as happens here sometimes, and they haven't been for a long time, well, that's okay. Come and see me and we'll work it out together. That's nothing to worry about, you see. But on the other hand, if it isn't something that's pressing, if he wants to return, but it's not an immediate pressing thing, or he may even want to change his religion, and it's not immediate, leave it. Because for the first stage of recovery, as you'll hear me say in another lecture, the most important thing is to get established in sobriety. That must come first, and anything else has to wait. So he can wait. And how does he know what God wants him to do in this, whether he wants to come back immediately or whether he can wait? Then there's a step catering for that. The second part of the 11th step says, we prayed for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry it out. And it'd be a strange, loving God who says, I want you to do my will, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. Obviously, God will tell him what it is. He doesn't mean he'll hear angelic choirs or heavenly voices, but he will know for certain what God wants him to do. He'll either have a conviction in his mind or he'll hear through other people or what have you. So there's Dick. Dick will find sobriety the same place as Tom, AA and NA, and should he return to the practice of his religion, if it's pressing, yes. If it isn't, it can wait. And then Harry believes in God and a loving God. He's got no difficulty there at all, but Harry does not have a religion. He's not a member of any church or religion. Harry has his own worship of God. It's common enough today, isn't it? Harry believes to worship God on his own, in his own way, you see. And there again, where will Harry find sobriety? The same as Tom, the same as Dick, the same as you and me, through AA and NA. And I have found that the kind of question that Harry is likely to think is, look, I've had to accept the fact that I don't find recovery from my addiction by myself. I need the help of others. I need a fellowship to encourage me and to challenge me to keep moving. Now, is it possible that my relations with God, my belief of God, would also benefit by having that kind of fellowship? Am I so self-sufficient that I don't need anyone to help me in my relations with God, my prayer and so on? And so he may say, maybe I should join some religious fellowship. And again with him, if it's a very pressing thing, that he should start doing so. Maybe move around to different religions. Try going to the Church of Scotland, for example, while he's here, or going to Mass, or when he's outside, going to a Quaker meeting or a synagogue, or try shop around. And he'll find one that he's comfortable with, and then develop that. But there again, he also needs to use that second part of the 11th step. Harry needs to say to the loving God that he believes in, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to join some church fellowship, religious fellowship? And again, God will let him know as well. Now we come to Mary. Mary believes in God, but Mary wishes perhaps that she didn't, because Mary is frightened of God. She has a frightening picture of God, a God to be afraid of. She may have a religion, she may not. Now, where did Mary get this image of God that she's frightened of? Well, none of us is born with any ideas about anything, and we're certainly not born with any idea of God. So Mary got her image of God the way everybody does. We get it through our parents and grandparents and other adults in our lives. And whoever Mary got her image of God from, they had an image of a God to be frightened of. And Mary has that. And it's a terrible thing to have. Because Mary can't follow the program. You see, the third step that she's going to be encouraged to take says we turn our will and our life over to the care of God. Mary's not going to turn her will and her life over to the care of someone she's terrified of. Then the fifth step says, I admitted to God the exact nature of my wrongs. Mary's not going to do that. She'll be frightened of being punished. You see? And then the 11th step says, we sought to improve our conscious contact with God. Mary's not going to do that. She keeps a safe distance from God. She's terrified of God. You see? It's a terrible thing. And also, it's going to be very hard for her, because the things we learn in early childhood from our parents, they're really carved very deep in us. We don't give them up. They're there all the time. An example of that, a very ordinary example of that, is nursery rhymes. Most of us knew some nursery rhymes before ever we started school. Presumably, we learnt them from our mothers, and we've got them for the rest of our lives. If somebody gives the first verse of a nursery rhyme, we can usually give the second or third lines. We usually can. It stays with us, something that is deep-rooted in us. Now, Mary's image of God she got from her parents. And if it's a negative image of God, it's deep-rooted in her, and she'll feel perhaps guilty about any idea of jettisoning this. You see? She either got this because her parents had a mistaken image of God, or there is another way, a tragic way, that she may have got it, and that is this. Inevitably, whatever it be our idea of God, we think of God to some degree or other as an authority figure. And many times we think of God in some way as a father figure. Whatever name we may give to God, it tends to be some kind of a father figure. Now, it will depend very much with Mary, what was her father like? You see? Did Mary spend her childhood terrified, waiting him to come in drunk and be violent? Is that her image of a father? Was it an absent father who was never there? Was it a father that she could never please? You could never satisfy him? A demanding? That's her image of God. See? That's the responsibility and the marvelous privilege for those of you who are fathers. You image God to your children, whether you like it or not. You image God. So it's a great responsibility, and it's a wonderful privilege. Your children will get their image of God from what kind of a relationship they have with you. And if they've had a bad one up to now, it doesn't need to continue, does it? You can change. It's not the reason for your sobriety, but it's a great bonus. So poor old Mary, she's stuck with this, you see. She's stuck with this frightened image of God. She's stuck with a God she can never please. And she'll never get sobriety from that. And she hears the AA and NA in their second tradition say, we recognize a loving God, but she doesn't know whether that's true or not. So she's going to ask herself, what do I do? Do I hang on to my old idea that God is someone to be frightened of, what I learned from my mom and dad and others? Or do I take a risk that AA and NA are right, that God is really loving and knows me and loves me? Which am I going to do? And she's going to have to choose. And it depends on how desperate she is for recovery. Because it's only if you're desperate will you make a choice like that. You see? And so she'll have to ask herself a question that I was told to ask myself every day, and I suggest you do the same thing. It's 3 questions, actually. On a scale of 1 up to 10, how much do you want to be clean and sober? And if it isn't 10, why isn't it 10? What are you holding back on? Why are you hedging your bets? And if it's yes, 10 out of 10, I want to be clean and sober, then the second question is, what about my attitude to the program and to everything about it? Is that 10 as well? And if it isn't 10, why isn't it? What's wrong with my attitude? You see? And I've been told that Alcoholics Anonymous is AA, which also stands for Altered Attitudes. And NA stands for Narcotics Anonymous, and it stands for Normal Attitudes. So why haven't I got a normal attitude to something that I'm 10 out of 10 desperate for recovery? What's the matter? What am I holding back on? And then the third question is my behavior at any given moment. Am I behaving like someone who is 10 out of 10 desiring recovery, or am I not? And if I'm not, why aren't I?